They say weddings bring families together. But sometimes they quietly reveal just how much distance has settled in between you. I wore the pale pink dress I'd been saving for years. I baked banana bread he used to crave. I even pressed the cardigan with the tiny pearl buttons. He once told me it made me look like the mothers in old TV shows. But when I stepped into that reception hall and saw there wasn't a seat reserved for me near him, I felt something inside me shift. That small shift would end up changing everything. Springtime in Upper Michigan is still and hushed. Not the kind of quiet that soothes you, but the sort that makes you feel left behind. My house sits by a motionless lake, surrounded by pine trees and old memories. I live alone now. My husband, Mac, died 4 winters ago. Our son, Owen, visits less and less. But I understand. Young people have their own paths. That's what we raise them for, isn't it? Lately, my days drift by unhurried. I bake banana bread in the mornings, read the local paper over a lukewarm coffee, and water the row of stubborn tulips out front that refuse to bloom on time. Sometimes I watch the mail truck roll past without stopping. Sometimes I imagine it's heading to someone down the road who also peers out every day, pretending they aren't hoping for anything. 3 weeks ago, Owen called to say he was getting married. His voice was bright but distracted. He told me her name was Lauren. When I asked about the wedding plans, he said they were thinking of something simple yet elegant. Then his words trailed off. He didn't ask my opinion. Didn't wonder which weekends I might be free. I offered to help with anything they needed. He told me not to worry, that everything was taken care of. I said I'd love to bake a pie for the rehearsal dinner. He chuckled softly and called it sweet. When I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long while. I felt something then, something I didn't voice, like I had suddenly become just a guest in a story I thought I'd been writing alongside him. Still, I chose to stay hopeful. I picked out my dress, swept the porch, even hemmed the sleeves of my coat because a part of me still believed. Maybe, just maybe, this wedding would bring us closer again. Sometimes the most profound losses don't announce themselves with slammed doors or loud arguments. They slip in quietly, in courteous dismissals that feel like 1,000 tiny wounds. That same silence follows you into bed and makes you lie awake, wondering when exactly you stopped being important. The wedding was held at a lakeside resort 2 hours south. A polished place, all timber beams and giant windows overlooking the water. Owen said it was Lauren's idea. She wanted something that felt both modern and classic. I got there early, just like I always do. I wore the pale pink dress I'd kept neatly pressed all these years. Soft pleats at the waist, understated, my hair pinned back, a little lipstick. An outfit a mother would wear to her son's most significant day. I walked through the lobby by myself. At the front desk, a young woman handed me a name tag and smiled as though she had no idea who I was. The tag simply read, Sylvia Hartley. No note that I was the groom's mother. No ribbon like the bride's family wore. I held the badge for a moment, then pinned it to my chest. Inside, guests mingled in small groups. Soft music floated above their laughter. Servers passed around trays of champagne and little chilled hors d'oeuvres that probably cost a fortune. I spotted Owen up near the front, next to Lauren, surrounded by people I didn't recognize. He didn't notice me right away. A young man with a headset gestured for me to follow him to a table in the back corner. I glanced around. The tables closer to the front had signs. Groom's co-workers. Bride's extended family. Maid of honor's parents. My place card simply said, Sylvia. No surname. No title. I sat between a man who sold home insurance and a woman from Vermont who raised alpacas. They were pleasant enough but had never met Owen. They spent most of the evening talking over me. During the speeches, the microphone passed from Lauren's father to her brother to her college roommate. There was a story about tequila shots and a camp memory. Someone eventually asked when the groom's mother would be speaking. Lauren laughed and said, maybe later, and moved on. Dinner arrived, plated without ceremony. I had the chicken, which was dry. A buttered roll sat untouched beside it. No one at my table finished their meals either. The desserts looked more elegant than they tasted. One bite of the lemon tart left me feeling more sour than sweet. Owen never once came to my table. He danced with Lauren, then with her mother, and then with someone's aunt. I waited. I smoothed my hem 3 times. I smiled at a photographer who walked by twice without lifting his camera. By night's end, I sat alone in that rented chair, surrounded by abandoned plates and guests halfway to their cars. I folded my napkin, tucked it under the edge of my glass, and slipped out without a word. No one said goodbye. No one saw me leave. A week passed after the wedding before Owen called me. He said he'd like to have me over for dinner. Just the 2 of us. He mentioned Lauren would be out with friends. His voice was bright but measured, like he was trying to sound casual. I told him I'd come. No questions asked. That evening, I put on the same cardigan I'd worn when I brought Owen home from the hospital. It still felt soft around my wrists. I baked a batch of oatmeal cookies and wrapped them in foil. The drive down was quiet. The roads were clear, and the sky was that flat, dull gray that makes you think winter hasn't quite let go yet, even when the calendar says it should. Owen's new house was in a tidy neighborhood on the edge of town. Brick siding, clipped hedges, matching porch lights, a doorbell camera. He opened the door smiling. A quick, polite expression. His hug was brief, more of a gesture than an embrace. He told me the kitchen was down the hall. Dinner wasn't ready. Instead, the table was set for 2, a bottle of wine already open, and a neat stack of papers placed beside the salad plates. The documents were organized with tabs, and a blue pen lay diagonally across the top page. Owen poured me a glass of wine, asked how the drive had been, and complimented the cookies. His words felt rehearsed, like he was following a script he'd memorized but hadn't authored himself. Then he gestured to the papers. He said they were just something to give us both peace of mind in case anything ever happened to me. He called it a standard durable power of attorney. Everyone did it, he said. He spoke as if he were reading a weather report. Calm, practical, without feeling. I nodded and picked up the stack. The first page was dense with legal terms, but the underlying message was clear. Financial authority, control over property, full access, immediate effect, no expiration date. It didn't say son. It didn't say family. It said agent. It said authorization. It said control. He smiled and told me there was no rush, but the pen was already uncapped. That's when I noticed there was no food on the plates, no smell of dinner cooking. Only the wine, the paperwork, and an unspoken expectation wrapped in a pleasant tone. I set the papers back down and said I'd take them home to read carefully. He nodded, lifted his wine glass, and glanced between the pen and my face. He didn't argue. He didn't need to. His silence carried enough weight. After that, we spoke about nothing, about the weather, the neighbor's new fence, a TV show I hadn't heard of. When I stood to leave, he walked me to the door and hugged me again. Lighter than before. Back in my car, I didn't start the engine right away. I sat there, my hands in my lap, the cookies still untouched on the passenger seat. The porch light behind me switched off after a minute. Motion sensor. Efficient. Automatic. Just like the dinner. I drove home that night and didn't even bother to take off my shoes. I sat down on the edge of the couch, my coat still half-zipped, my hands resting in my lap as if they belonged to someone else. The house was so quiet. It felt as though even the kitchen clock had stopped ticking. For a moment, I wasn't sure if I was breathing. Absolutely. Here's the next portion rewritten seamlessly. Rewrite, part 4 after a while. I stood up and walked downstairs to the basement. My knees ached on each step, and the air grew colder as I descended, settling into the old wooden beams. At the far end, behind the washing machine, there was a low cabinet hidden beneath a shelf of paint cans. I had to kneel to reach it. Inside sat a small metal box. I hadn't opened it since the year Mark died. He always told me that if anything happened to him, I'd find everything I needed inside. I'd never felt a reason to look before. But that night, something in me knew it was time. The lid creaked as I lifted it. Everything was organized exactly as Mark used to keep it. Tidy stacks of folders, neatly labeled. At the bottom was an envelope with my name on it in his handwriting. My chest tightened just seeing it. The letter inside was brief. Only a paragraph. He wrote that he knew I would never ask for help, even if I needed it. That he'd prepared things so I'd never feel trapped or reliant on anyone. He said not to tell Owen, not because he didn't love him, but because he understood how the world works. Money has a way of changing people, or revealing who they've been all along. The documents listed 2 accounts in my name, a portfolio of investments I hadn't known existed, stock options, mutual funds, and an annuity linked to a small property in Texas. Together, it was worth more than $7 million. I stared at the figure, then closed the folder, then opened it again, convinced I must have misread it. I didn't cry. Not then. I didn't feel relieved either. Instead, it was something heavier, like holding a secret too big for the room. I sat there on the basement floor for a long time, the cold soaking into my legs, the metal box open beside me. What I felt most was the weight of everything Mark had left behind. Not just the money, but the trust, the foresight, the quiet protection I hadn't realized I needed until that night. He had seen something coming before I ever did. And in his own quiet way, he had given me the thing I needed most. Not safety, not riches, but choice. I shut the box, turned the key, and stood slowly, my legs stiff, my hands trembling in a way that had nothing to do with age. Upstairs, I switched off all the lights except the one over the kitchen table. I sat down with a blank notepad and the stack of papers Owen had handed me, and I began to write. Not the response he expected, but the words I needed to say. 2 days later, mid-morning, the phone rang. I had just settled at the table with a bowl of cereal, still wearing my slippers. The phone buzzed once, then again. I ignored the first call. The second time, I picked up. Owen's voice was smoother than usual, almost cautious. He said he was calling to check in, to see how I was doing, to ask if I'd had a chance to review the documents. I told him I had. I kept my tone steady. He paused just a fraction too long, then said there was no rush, but it would be wise to get everything squared away, just in case. I asked what exactly he meant by that. He started rambling about planning, about being practical, about making sure I was protected. But his words looped in circles. He mentioned a news story about a woman who lost access to her accounts after a stroke. Then he talked about a friend's mother who forgot her passwords for months. I could hear what was underneath all that. A list of reasons that weren't really about caring, but about strategy. When I didn't respond, he cleared his throat and said he just wanted what was best. Then, a shift in his voice, an edge returning. He said if we waited too long, it might be harder to arrange everything. That the sensible thing was to sign now while it was simple. While he spoke, I looked out the window. The trees were bare. A squirrel dotted across the yard, paused, and vanished into a patch of brush. I watched it disappear, feeling something sharp settle under my ribs. I told him I'd think about it. He said that was fine. Then he added that Lauren had found a financial advisor who could help make the process easier, and they'd be happy to set it up for me. We ended the call. I sat at the table, staring at my cereal until it turned soggy. I couldn't bring myself to move. I thought about all the nights I sat up with Owen when he was sick. How I once drove 5 hours through a snowstorm to bring him a spare tire. Not because I had to, but because that was my definition of love. And now, here he was, speaking to me like I was just a transaction. A logistical detail. The house felt smaller. The quiet pressed in closer. I stood, poured the cereal down the sink, and let the water run until all the milk was gone. Then I opened the drawer by the fridge, pulled out the manila envelope that held everything Mark had arranged for me, and held it in both hands. It didn't feel like protection. Not yet. It felt like the last piece of something he had built for me. And it was time I built something for myself. Not out of resentment, but because even love has its limits. And I had finally reached mine. It took me 3 days to decide what to do. Not because I was uncertain, but because I needed the quiet to mean something. I didn't want my next move to come from fear or pride. I wanted it to be rooted in understanding, in the clarity of knowing what was being asked of me, and what I could no longer allow. I found Carol's number scribbled on the back of an old birthday card. She'd been a trust and estate attorney before she retired. We hadn't spoken in years, not since her husband passed away. But I remembered how she once told me, the quietest women often leave the deepest marks. When I called, she answered right away. Her voice sounded older, but still sharp as ever. I told her everything that had happened. She didn't react. She just listened. Then she said we should meet. No fuss. No judgment. Just coffee and clarity. The next afternoon, we sat at her kitchen table. Her home was small, tidy, filled with quilts and books. I handed her the envelope. She read every word of Mark's documents, her eyes moving like someone who had spent her life reading things too late to save people. When she finished, she looked at me and said I had more power than I realized. That the money was secure, the investments were sound, the legal standing was strong, but only if I kept it that way. She asked if I wanted to set up a trust. I told her, yes. She asked whose names I wanted to include. I said, no one. Not now. Maybe never. She nodded. Then she asked me to bring out the papers Owen had given me. I pulled them from my bag. She flipped through the pages without blinking. She said the wording was aggressive. Immediate authority. Broad access. No oversight. These aren't forms meant to care for you, she said. They're written to consume you. Together, we rewrote everything. We transferred the accounts into a private trust under my sole control. We locked access behind conditions no one could circumvent. Carol added a medical clause that required 2 independent doctors to confirm any incapacity before anything could change. Then she handed me a pen. I signed slowly, carefully, not because I was afraid, but because I was drawing a boundary I should have established years ago. A simple line across the paper that declared, I am not invisible. I am not an obligation. I am not yours to manage. When it was done, Carol slipped everything into a thick folder. She told me to store it somewhere easy for me to reach, but not obvious. At home, I tucked it behind the dishwasher pods under the sink, the box no one ever touched. Driving back, the air felt changed. Not lighter, exactly, but clearer, like I could finally see the outline of my life without squinting. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a mother who'd been left behind. I felt like a woman who still had a spine, and a choice. The invitation came by text. Owen wrote that he wanted to try again. A proper dinner, just the 2 of us. No paperwork. No pressure. I waited several hours before replying. Then I typed just 1 word. Sure. I didn't mention that I wouldn't be coming alone. Carol met me a block from the house. She parked across the street. We agreed she wouldn't walk in with me. She'd stay close. watching, ready if I needed her. But I wasn't nervous anymore. I had learned the difference between being still and being soft. Owen opened the door with an easy smile, wearing a button-down shirt and socks with no shoes, like he hoped I'd remember the boy who used to run barefoot through the hallway. The kitchen smelled of garlic and roasted vegetables. There was bread set out on the table. Real food. Or at least it looked that way. We sat and made small talk first. He asked if I'd been reading anything interesting. I told him about a mystery novel I'd checked out from the library. He nodded, but didn't ask what it was about. His eyes kept shifting to the side table, where another stack of papers waited. Different this time, but not unfamiliar. When he finally reached for them, his voice slowed, became deliberate. He said he'd spoken to someone who specialized in elder law, and they recommended a simpler arrangement. Nothing binding, he insisted. Just provisional. Just something to keep everything smooth. He slid the papers across to me. I didn't pick them up. Instead, I placed my own folded document on top. No words, just the soft sound of paper resting on paper. Then I lifted my water glass and took a slow sip. At first, he looked puzzled. Then he unfolded the document. It was a formal notice of trust execution. My signature at the bottom. Full transfer of assets into private protection. Revocable only by me. His face didn't change right away. But his eyes did. They started blinking more. His jaw shifted, like he was tasting something bitter and trying to hide it. I spoke carefully. I said I was grateful for his concern. That I understood life could be overwhelming. That being prepared was important. But I had already taken care of my plans. Everything was settled. Everything was final. He asked if I had spoken to someone. I said yes. A friend. Someone who knew how to prepare without pressuring. The room went quiet. He leaned back in his chair. His fingers tapped the tablecloth once. Then stilled. In that moment, he didn't look like a son or a husband. He looked like a man realizing he had run out of angles. That was when Carol walked in, calm, courteous. She greeted Owen gently and introduced herself. Then she thanked him for dinner, and said we'd be heading out now. I stood, picked up my coat, and walked to the door without looking back. Outside, the air was crisp with wind. I exhaled, not from anger, but from release. For the first time, I wasn't walking away wounded. I was walking away sure. The next morning dawned colder than the forecast had promised, the kind of chill that creeps into floorboards and stays. I made toast and poured a glass of orange juice, then sat at the kitchen table without touching either. My hands were still warm from the night before, but in my chest, I felt something shutting itself away. Around 10, my phone buzzed. A single message. Just one line from Owen. You made this harder than it needed to be. No greeting. No signature. Just those words. I stared at the screen a long while, then set the phone face down. The toast had gone cold. The juice no longer looked inviting. There was no follow-up message. No apology. No explanation. And I knew, in that unspoken way a mother knows, this wasn't about hurt feelings. It was about control. About a door he thought he could leave open forever, and now found closed. Later that day, I walked into the garage to sort through boxes I hadn't touched in years. I found the old photo albums. I opened one to a Christmas long past. Owen was 5, cheeks red from the cold, holding up a toy truck. His smile so wide you could see every gap in his teeth. That smile had been my fuel through countless nights of worry and exhaustion. It had been my reason for so much. But now, I saw something else. A boy who had learned early that he never had to ask twice for what he wanted. Mark and I had made sure of it. Not because he demanded it, but because we believed love meant removing every obstacle. We gave too much. And somewhere along the way, he began to think he deserved what was never his to claim. That afternoon, I received another text, this time from Lauren. She said she was sorry things had become strained, that they were only trying to be prudent, to plan for the future. Then she added that if I ever wanted to talk, she'd be available. Her last sentence stuck with me longer than I expected. You raised a strong son. We just wanted to support his future. I read it twice. The words were polite, neatly phrased, but beneath them, I heard something clear as a bell. You've had your time. Now step aside. I didn't reply. I set the phone down on the counter. That night, I poured the orange juice down the sink. Not out of anger, but because I didn't want to drink something that had lost its warmth. I stood at the window, watching darkness settle over the roofs. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I just stood there. Sometimes the strongest answer you can give is no answer at all. And sometimes, when a door closes, it isn't meant to reopen. Not through guilt. Not through pleading. And certainly not because of blood. The house had never been loud, even when Mark was alive. But after the last call from Owen, and the silence that followed, the quiet felt different, like a final verdict. I started moving more slowly through the rooms. Not because I was tired, but because there was no need to hurry. The days settled into a new shape. I folded towels with extra care, wiped down spotless counters, watered the plants at the same hour each morning. I wasn't expecting any calls, but I still noticed when none came. 3 days passed before the voicemail light blinked. I didn't answer, but I listened. Owen's voice came through the speaker. Muted, like he was standing behind a door. He knew I wasn't going to open. He said he had overreacted. He only wanted to be sure everything was in order. Then, in a softer tone, he said he missed how things used to be. He hoped we could talk again, just talk. I didn't delete the message. I didn't save it, either. I let it sit there in that gray space between obligation and memory. Later that night, I scrolled through old text threads. Photos of Owen grilling in the backyard. Lauren holding a pie we'd baked together. A blurry snapshot of the dog we once shared. And further back, messages from when Owen used too many exclamation marks, when he still signed off with love you. I looked at them without trying to feel anything, just noticing what used to be. Then, one by one, I began deleting them. Not in bitterness, but in acknowledgement. The only one I kept was a video. Owen at 10, holding a flashlight under his chin, telling a scary story while my voice, younger then, laughed in the background. I watched it twice, then closed my phone. I went to bed early that night. Not to sleep, but to lie still in the dark. The bed felt larger, not emptier, just more honest. I had given that boy everything I could, and the man he became had tried to use it against me. That was the hardest part. Not the greed, not the manipulation, but realizing that all I gave in love had been turned into leverage. Somewhere along the way, I had stopped being his mother and become just a resource. That was a grief no one warns you about. A grief that sounds like your own voice on a machine, echoing back nothing. I moved at the end of February, just before the snow finally melted. The new house wasn't far, still near the lake, but tucked deeper into a quiet street. It was smaller, older, the kind of place with a crooked mailbox and shutters that rattled in the wind. But it felt right, like it had been waiting for someone who no longer needed space to entertain, just space to exhale. I didn't bring much. A photo of Mark on the bookshelf, the smudged recipe cards, a few boxes of books, the blue chipped kettle, and a ceramic owl from the garden that had never scared any birds. Most mornings, I walked to the library, not for the books, but because I liked hearing the soft rustle of pages nearby. I picked up a few shifts at the front desk. Nothing official, just enough to feel useful. That's where I met them, the women who came each week. They weren't loud. They didn't sit in matching jackets. They arrived quietly, one by one, and stayed longer than they needed. Some read, some wrote, some simply looked out the window, as if waiting for something they knew wouldn't return. There was Helen, who made quilts from her late husband's shirts. June, who always brought peppermint tea in a thermos with her sister's initials on it. And Margot, who carried a cane but never used it until she reached the doorway. We didn't become friends all at once. It happened slowly, over shared thermoses, knowing nods, and the quiet understanding that none of us had to explain what we'd lost. One afternoon, Margot asked if I'd help her with the garden bed behind the library. I said yes before I'd even seen it. The soil was hard, pressed down by winter, stubborn the way neglected things can be. But together, we turned it over, row by row, hands dirty, knees in the dirt. We planted tomatoes, basil, a few sunflowers, just to be defiant. We called it the quiet corner. It became ours. We rarely talked about our children. When we did, it wasn't with bitterness, just a gentle recognition, like glancing at a scar and remembering how it felt before it broke the skin. What we shared wasn't grief. It was clarity, a new belonging, not to each other, but to ourselves. There, with soil under my nails and books close by, I stopped feeling like a burden. I began feeling like a woman again. Not waiting, not regretting, just present, rooted, ready to grow.